Hi, I'm McCarthy Coyle, and we're in the office of Mike Cooney, the Secretary of State of Montana. And a little background on Mike Cooney. His grandfather was governor of Montana during the 1930s. Mike himself went to school at the University of Montana. He went to work on an early Max Baucus campaign back in the 70s. Went on himself to serve 2 terms in the legislature. Before going to work on Max Baucus's payroll, both working here in Montana, constituent work, I guess, service, and then back to Washington, D.C. for 4 years, working again for Max Baucus, and then eventually you returned home, and you were first elected Secretary of State
1988.
And Mike is now in his 3rd term, just beginning your 3rd term, and then because of the term limits legislation, you're out of this job.
Right.
Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, one does hear plenty of political gossip around the state, and that everybody's interested in being governor. Well, what's the story with you, or are you thinking ahead?
Well, I think anybody who is in politics has to think a little bit ahead. Mm-hmm. Although, let me say, in politics, the one thing I've learned, 4 years is an eternity. So many things can happen in 4 years. 2 years is a long period of time. But I'm obviously aware that I can't have this job. Mm-hmm. After when the year 2000 rolls around, I have to think about doing something else. If I want to stay in elected office, there are a handful of offices that may be out there for me to consider. But the one thing that I've got this job, and I've got a lot to do, and so I've got focused most of my attention on what I'm doing, but I'm looking ahead a little bit, trying to see where the political landscape will lead me and take it from there.
Well, first, I think many observers would suggest that the Secretary of State's job is not an onerous one, that it is essentially a job of signing papers, sealing documents, keeping track of corporate records, and that, not you in particular, but basically the office itself is not a heavyweight office compared to, let's say, the Attorney Generalship or the State Auditor, things like that. Could you tell us what do you think is the most serious function of your office? And go for it.
Well, I think you're correct. This is not a policy-making office, and that is one of the beauties of it. I can be very involved in a lot of things going on in government. I can be involved in a lot of the political things that are of interest to me, but I don't typically find myself embroiled in a tremendous amount of controversy. But I think this office does provide a number of services which are, I think, very important. First of all, Secretary of State is the head of elections, and if there's anything that is the cornerstone of our democratic process, it is the whole process of elections, how we choose the people who represent us in our democratic.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there with this question then. Have you expressed yourself on this business of fusion candidacies in terms of elections, where let's say if myself, Coyle, wanted to run for office and I ran as a Democrat, but also at the XYZ party liked me too, and they wanted me on the ballot under their label, and that we have some states in the union, like New York State, in which you can run on all kinds of party lines, and people use that mechanism to win successful races, including the United States Senate. So where they're running on 3 lines. How do you feel about a fusion policy?
Well, specifically on that item, I'm not all that knowledgeable of how it works. I know in Montana it's not currently legal. I don't know that there's been any bills introduced to allow it. Personally, my response to most of these election reforms is that if it opens up the ballot, allows for greater access of candidates, gives people a bigger choice, I'm for it. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we really need to head with elections. We need to tear down barriers. We've got to make things easier for people to participate, both as candidates and as voters. Mm-hmm. And reforms that lead to results such as that, I'm in favor of. I'm aware of what they've done and what they do in New York, but again, I've not studied it, and it's never really been brought up as a viable option in Montana. Right. But certainly, I'd like to look at it.
For example, over in Missoula, where the new party, which essentially had been Many of them consider themselves Democrats of one stripe or another. They're generally considered progressive. They've had quite a track record in gaining effective control of the Missoula City Council government. And yet, week after week, you hear about antagonisms that, from what I pick up, come from the Democratic Party structure that does not, is not thrilled about working with new party, things like that. I don't know if you had any, thought or remark about that, or whether you'd heard anything like that.
Well, I guess I'm not totally familiar with the party squabbles that may be occurring within Missoula County. Change is very difficult for a lot of people to accept. One of the things we've seen in Montana is in the last election we had 5 major political parties represented on the ballot. This is, in my opinion, a really good trend. Again, it goes towards opening up the process and bringing people and getting more people involved. And it sounds to me that Missoula has done the same thing on a more local level. This is not something to be fearful of, in my opinion, and I would tell anybody, you may not agree with everything these people, whoever they may be out there talking about, but the bottom line is it is representing more people are being brought into the process. So sit down, find out where if people would first and foremost sit down and look at what they agree on, they would find they agree on probably a lot more than what they disagree on, but you have to get to that point. So I would hope that's what we would see occurring.
Let's talk about political process a little bit. You'll recall that there was, I've been in Montana. I'm proud to say that I am not a 4th generation Montanan. I'm an immigrant. I'm a born-again Montanan, and I'm very happy about that. I get very, present company accepted. I'm not charmed when I read, and he's a 4th generation Montanan, as if that gave that person a great deal more credibility than us poor immigrants. But having been in the state for 20 years, I do recall that one year we did use the caucus process to select candidates. And I know myself and other people in Missoula and around the state felt very much empowered by using the caucus method of selecting our candidates. And we noticed that very quickly, within a year, I think, or two, the party changed its mind about caucuses and wanted to go back to primaries because they felt disempowered by the caucus proposition. I mean, you recall those years, and could you comment on that?
Well, the party, those sorts of rules are governed mostly by party rules, and obviously those people who are empowered as leaders of the party can have a tremendous say in where items like that end up. The caucus is it's a very interesting process. It does empower a lot of people. It is a time-consuming and in some respects, logistically, a very difficult process. It's not as convenient as just going and electing people at a primary election. I would think, again, it is one of those things that we will see maybe go back and forth. Montana right now, with the election, primary election, we don't play a role in presidential politics with the current system. We're not an early primary in the presidential campaign season, and as a result, we're basically ignored. But as legislation works its way through Congress and as states continue to try to work together, we may see that start to change a little bit, where some of the western states that tend to hold later primary elections would have a greater say in the presidential selection process, or the primary selection process. Again, it really doesn't matter. I think if caucuses are the thing that bring more people in, and one of the things we can't do is set up a process that just keeps the same people involved. We need to constantly be bringing new blood into the political process. And I think that's one of the biggest failures of our current system right now. The same people tend to be involved, and new people don't feel very comfortable with it. They don't see that there's a place for them to be involved. So we do need to change the process, and whether it's through caucuses or moving a primary election closer to the earlier stages of the primary, who knows? But Montana should have a role in it.
Now, your constitutional authority as Secretary of State includes your other powerful function and tell me if there is one more area, but that's, you're on the state lands board, right?
Yes.
And is there another state?
There's another board called the Board of Examiners.
Okay.
And the Board of Examiners is the Attorney General, the Governor, the Secretary of State. And currently, our major function is to approve, give final and ultimate approval to much of the bonding that occurs in the state. That's now what it does. It used to be very, very powerful, but over the years, that has changed, and with the growth of government,
But
responsibilities have been shifted.
This is just an uninformed question, but anytime I hear about money in bonds, then it would seem that it's a powerful and an important function.
It can be. I mean, you take, for instance, something like what they call a trans bond, which is a tax revenue anticipation note. It allows the state to sell bonds. Before we get all our tax revenue in to pay the bills, we have to literally borrow money to pay the bills throughout the year until we get all the revenue in, and then we end up paying the trans bond off. That has been, in a way, it's kind of a routine matter because you got to have money to pay the bills, but they have to be done a certain way. And there was a special legislative session a few years back, which was really a direct result of the Board of Examiners refusing to sell a trans, and so it can be fairly important.
And now, on the State Lands Board, the 5 statewide elected officials, the governor, yourself, Secretary of State, the Attorney General, Nancy Keenan, Superintendent of Public Instruction, and Mark O'Keefe, the state auditor, sit on the State Lands Board. Now, I understand that constitutionally, your first obligation is to maximize income for schools from the school lands, and then you divvy those monies up and they go to support our public school system in Montana. However, there does seem, I was talking with Mark O'Keefe and others recently about the matter, and I said, does the public interest fit into this? And I'm speaking specifically now about the state school lands that will be used if the gold mine does somehow, I mean, that's up in Lincoln, is going to happen, or the gold mining company wants a 7-Up Pete, right? And there are some considered opinions, including Mark O'Keefe, if I may paraphrase what he had to say to me yesterday, says, yes, he believes that the long-range public interest, even in the economic sense, must be considered, and that it is within the realm of possibility and within the boundaries of the Constitution to be able to say, I'm sorry folks, but this is one that even though we have to sacrifice X millions of dollars for that school, that the long-range health and just benefits for the public outweigh our immediate need for cash. Could you comment on how you're looking at that?
Well, I do think that it is clear that the board's major responsibility is a fiduciary one, and it's to return the highest amount of money to the school trust. The other part of that equation is that it is also our responsibility to be good stewards of the land and to make sure that that land is used in such a way that we can get a good return, but that land will continue to be able to get a return for generations to come. I mean, this is truly a treasure that we've been very, very careful with in the state of Montana. Unlike many states that have sold it off and gotten rid of it over the years and have nothing to show for it now, we have maintained our state lands, and I think this current land board has done a tremendous job at trying to manage it to benefit the people of Montana greatly. And I do think that when we're considering a project such as the McDonald Gold Mine project or any other project or anything as simple as maybe an agricultural lease on this, we not only have to look at the amount of money that it's going to return to the trust, but is it in the best interest of the long-term use of that land, and will that benefit future generations? So I think that is something that we will have to look at. McDonald Gold Mine is going to be, I think, is now and continues to be and will continue to be a fairly controversial issue. this is an issue the land board itself has decided it wants to take a major and personal role in, and I believe that ultimately any final decision on that gold mine project will ultimately be made by the land board, as well as all the other agencies involved. But what's very interesting about this is that mine, where they're proposing that mine, is right smack dab on a state lease. Mm-hmm. And so they will have to get a final okay or a final disposition of that issue from the state land board before it'll be able to go forward. And I think that's only proper, and so the people will have many opportunities to have a say on how they want that to be treated.
Are your personal freedoms being threatened by the extremist agenda of our state legislature? Do you think there's a connection between the attacks on civil rights and reproductive rights, attacks on welfare recipients, gay marriage? Do you want to know how you can make a difference? Those are all statements on a brochure advertising a statewide tour called Community Conversations, organized in part by the Montana Women's Lobby. And we're talking today with Sandy Oitzinger, who's the director of the Montana Women's Lobby. And I did want to say that I first met Sandy almost 20 years ago in Washington, D.C., when I went back east to visit Pat Williams. And Sandy was a staffer for Pat in those early days. And we've known each other since that time. A few years later, after a few trips to Montana, Sandy decided that she'd prefer to live out here, and you started a second family, and like me, you've been, a born-again Montanan. And you have been active in the past years in many areas, but amongst them are the Montana Women's Economic Development
Capital Fund.
Capital Fund, and that was doing what? You were board president of that group, is that right?
Yes, I was, McCarthy, and that organization provides business capital to micro businesses in Montana in a tri-county area, and we have a lot of women-owned micro businesses, and the mission of that group is to help serve them and provide them the capital that they need to grow.
Mm-hmm. And so you've been away from that organization for a couple of years now, is that right?
Well, about a year, yeah.
A year. Uh-huh. And now you're with the Women's Lobby, and tell us about that, and tell us about your upcoming community conversation, which is happening in Missoula on Tuesday, February the 11th, at the University Congregational Church at 7 o'clock. And we'll repeat that for our audience here in Missoula. But what's going on? I mean, these are pretty bold statements on this brochure. What's your Women's Lobby concerned about? What's scary? What should folks be doing? Who are you working with? Mm-hmm. And what's going on? You're here, right here in Helena every day.
Okay, well, to start, McCarthy, as many of your viewers know, the Montana Women's Lobby is a progressive public policy coalition, and our mission is to advocate for policies that benefit women and families. And we were founded in 1982, and we are up here at the legislature biannually, and a lot of folks are familiar with the work that we do. We decided this session to join with several other progressive organizations, including the Montana Human Rights Network, Montana NARAL, and Montana Pride, and do a series of community conversations. And what we hope to achieve with this little roadshow that we're doing is to improve the unified response of the progressive community to what we frankly believe are kind of extremist, kind of scapegoating tactics that have been going on last session and this session. Mm-hmm. And so we really want to get out there and talk to people and let them know what we see happening, and also, more importantly, to listen, because we believe that this extremism is not really at the core of Montana's worldview, and we want to be able to discuss that with people and to get that message back here to Helena.
Well, a couple at the last legislature, when this extremism, and I agree, that's what I'd call it. I was surprised at the time, and I guess I have to take my own responsibilities there too as an individual citizen. But I was, I'd read something in the paper about something that was going on in the legislature. I said, that's crazy. So then I'd be expecting, 2 buses of people to unload themselves at the state capitol, the way people have done in years gone by, to come up and say, we don't like what's going on. And that never really happened very much in the last legislature. So would this be tactically, is this the kind of thing that you're hoping might emerge? That more, you're trying to get more people to pay attention. You want them to listen to what's going on. You want to listen to what their concerns, but...
I think that there's already a bit of a mobilization going on the part of some of the organizations that are participating in this. I guess I would like to say that there seems to be 2 dynamics that are going on here. One is kind of the carnival atmosphere where you're getting, all sorts of things from public spankings to corporal punishments in the schools and, bedroom issues and all of this sort of thing. And then, then you do sort of wonder why you're not getting busloads of people here. But I think that there may be some awareness that this is just kind of carnival. And, but the other issues, which are maybe even more fundamental, involve the economics of programs to help people. And, this is where we're seeing a lot of really troubling things like, the turnback of critically needed federal funds, say for the Montana Human Rights Commission, say for, of all things, Head Start. There is $5 million of child care funding that is being held in abeyance, and all sorts of surrounding money issues having to do with welfare reform issues in this state. And it all just kind of boils down to a scapegoating, and who are you going to pick on, and what can we do to create divisions among people. It's really the politics of division, I believe, and how can we create an us and them, and part of it. It's one person's view, but I think that there is a lot of anxiety out in the electorate, and I believe that this kind of scapegoating that's going on is really just an effort to smokescreen the bankruptcy of ideas to deal with the real economic problems in our state and in our country, and why is it that we have so few people who consider themselves to be stakeholders in our communities. Having said that, I think that I would also have to say that the times are challenging enough that it's just essential that we build bridges and we work together across all parties on our political, and having said that, clearly I have the sense that, a particular party has kind of been overtaken by a conservative element that, I think it makes it very difficult for the moderates in that party, and I don't really envy them that position.
Mm-hmm. That what I see in the nation as a whole is a certain disaffection with political process, and so people are not jumping into the fray, and
yeah, and I was just going to say that I think that's why, if I can self-aggrandize a little bit that organizations like the Women's Lobby are so critical because we are really here to keep all parties honest.
Good. And just tell us again, you'll be in Missoula on February the 11th.
Tuesday, February 11th, between 7 and 9 at the University Congregational
Right, church.
Church. And we'll be there with NARAL, the Montana Human Rights Network, and Pride, and the Montana Women's Lobby. And we know that we're working together for justice here, and we would just love it if the local Missoulians would come out, and they're probably doing some of that at the local level already. But I'd just like to mention that there were a couple of local organizations from Missoula that are supporting this community conversation locally, and that would include Women's Voices for the Earth, WORD, and Missoula Advocates for Social Justice. So we will look forward to seeing them and all of you there.
We're talking with Vickie Cocchiarella. Vickie is the minority leader of the Democratic Party in the Montana House of Representatives. She is the leader of 35 Democrats in the House versus 65 Republicans. Vickie was born in Livingston, moved around the state of Montana quite a few times, but has been a settled, self-described Missoula girl since she was in third grade. She got her master's degree in interpersonal communications at the University of Montana. She's the mother of 2 children, and she's the wife of a man I don't know. And how did you wind up with the job of minority leader?
That's an interesting process. Basically, when you run for a leadership position, it's like campaigning all over again, and I campaigned with the Democrats in my caucus. I guess I worked my way up by being one of the kind of legislators that listens to people and tries to incorporate their ideas and tries to work with everyone, both sides of the aisle, to come up with best solutions to problems.
It's a pretty small minority you're working with, I mean, in numbers here. And I was talking yesterday with Mark O'Keefe, the state auditor, and I said, doesn't there seem to be signs that the Democratic Party in Montana is in some difficulties? And what thoughts do you have on that, and how you see the party revivifying itself and getting some more clout in the House that you represent?
You know, it's interesting. Last session, there were only 33 of us, so we have improved our numbers by 2. On the other side of that issue is the Senate did lose 2 Democrats, so they're kind of in the boat we were last time. I agree that we have a lot of work ahead of us to turn those numbers around. I think that we've seen some things happen nationwide, some trends. They say the pendulum swings. I believe that will happen. I think one thing that we've had difficulty in is getting out the Democratic message. It seems that people forget why unions exist and the importance of labor unions and how those good jobs came to be. I think Democrats have not focused enough their message that we believe in good paying jobs for everyone, that we don't want people on welfare, but we need to give them a hand to make sure that they can support themselves in our state. We need to work more on job development, economic development. Some of those messages, some of those things that I believe in my heart that are democratic values aren't being heard out there. We aren't doing a good job of getting that message out.
Of course, I'm from Missoula myself, and let's take that as an example. I hear, on the grapevine that the new party folks who've had quite an influence in Missoula and have effective, control of city council, that the Democratic Party in town, in Missoula, has not been hospitable to other progressives like these new party folks. And I don't know whether you've heard that and whether you put any stake in it and whether there's room for improvement there.
Well, I've heard about that, but I don't see that there's a disagreement, at least on my part, with the new party or anything they stand for. I think if you looked at my record, my votes, and how I believe in their same philosophies, there is no conflict there. There are people who think that splintering off of the Democrats is harmful to Democrats. I think that the new party and the Democratic Party, the Democratic umbrella can encompass the new party politics, and I think that left wing of our party is very important to keep us centered on what things are important. I don't believe necessarily that everyone in the city council's been elected by the new party. I think people have been elected by the people who believe in what those people have stood for. You know, I think there's room for everybody, and I don't think that the new party is an enemy or to be discounted at all in any way, shape, or form. They're small, they're very well organized, they have some of the best organizers in their group, and that really gives them a lot of clout in a lot of ways because they have some hard workers, and I just think those hard workers have always been a part of what we've done, and I have no resentment or disregard for them at all. I think it's important to have them.
You know, speaking, you know, I mean, you're a citizen legislator, but putting aside your job as minority leader for the second, what to you would be 2 or 3 of the most important things for you on this floor in this session, win or lose? You know, what's fundamentally troubling you or inspiring you? What are a couple of things like that?
My big, huge concern, number one, is the trend I see here for cutting prevention programs of all kinds in favor of incarceration of human beings, in favor of punishment. That's the wrong direction, and it is when I see cuts in programs and giving back $500,000 to the federal government that was granted to us for Head Start, one of the most successful programs, proven to work kinds of programs. When I see those things happening, it makes me very emotionally involved in fighting for that cause. Education to me, prevention of child abuse, prevention of drug and alcohol abuse, prevention of all those problems that we cause to have perpetuated in our children that turn them into prisoners rather than productive people. I want the focus to be there. I want us to stop spending our money on jail cells and prisons and all of that horrible stuff that costs our society so much more money than that prevention dollar would save if we spent it that way. So education, to me, in all forms, as early as we can, taking care of our children. I also am disturbed by an effort to bust the coal tax trust. We have gotten along in this legislature, as long as I've been here, we've had a coal tax trust buster bill. That is a savings account to me that doesn't have a definition for the day that it's raining or that there's a big enough crisis. No one in Montana has ever had a conversation of when is it appropriate to spend this money and on what. Every session we've had a bill, we've killed that bill. I don't think that the governor's plan today and tomorrow is, we describe as play today, pay tomorrow, is worth that kind of vote, worth that risk of losing that coal money that's a future general fund source.
Do I hear you making the suggestion that perhaps we need to have a conversation about the matter of when we define the rainy day?
I'd really like to see that happen. I'd like to see a bunch of Montana citizens get together who are really concerned about this, who have a futuristic view, not a spend it now and see what we've got when we're done here attitude. That's how I feel this is happening. It's, look, I can put together this little package of things that we can spend all this money on right now, and it's wrong. It's just not the way to go.
When you were talking before about turning back, dollars that were ours coming from the federal government for Head Start, is that correct? where's, I mean, Governor Roscoe has the reputation of, in some quarters of, you know, he's very mild-mannered and modestly spoken, etc. And so I guess in some circles he's called Saint Mark. But so what's your take then on, does that suggest that there's a vacuum in leadership on the gubernatorial side, or that the governor himself is encouraging his own party to reject things like this? Do you have a take on that?
Actually, it is not the governor in this case. It's the legislator, the Republicans in the Subcommittee on Human Services, because the governor signed that grant proposal. Montana was issued that grant, and it was in the governor's budget. So the governor is not the enemy in this case, and I don't know if you want to describe it as enemy, but the roadblock to receiving Montana taxpayer dollars back to help our children get a good start in their education.
But in a situation like that, let's say, where he's signed off and he wants the grant, at least by his signature, do you see him, you know, lobbying his own party and saying, well, look, I signed this, guys and gals, and I'd like some backing on this? I mean, do you think that happens?
This is a generalization about leadership that I truly believe. The only way to have 80% of the vote to be that popular is to take no leadership role, no position, because when we take make leadership moves or votes, half the people are probably mad at us most of the time. Mark Roscoe is a very fine human being, and I hear people say over and over when they talk to him after lobbying him for something, oh, isn't he a nice man, and come away with nothing. Yes, I believe it's Mark Roscoe's role to at least promote those issues he believes in, that he has told us in state of state speeches and the speeches he makes to the citizens, to come in and tell us. On the other hand, the executive branch has a lot of power, and I have a huge concern about the erosion of power of the citizens' branch of government, especially with term limits coming. Term limits will only allow the bureaucrats to have more power. People will not have as much say because this process is too complicated to learn and be effective in 2 or 3 terms. So, you know, Mark Roscoe, he's a really, really nice guy, and he's got a decent budget. I have problems with the correction, $100 million in corrections. I want that money to go somewhere else. But yeah, he should be an advocate. If he truly believes what's in that budget, he should be advocating for the elements of that budget. And he hasn't been around yet.
Do we have any Native Americans serving in the legislature this term?
We have 3 on our side of the aisle, and there's 1 on the Republican side.
Right. Could you comment, over the years, it seems to me that within state government itself, other than every governor's appointee as their Indian Affairs coordinator, correct me if I have a wrong impression, but I see or hear or know of Native Americans in major policy-making positions in state government.
Oh, I don't think you're wrong about that. It's very interesting. The 3 members of our caucus who are here are very concerned and always want us to be reminded of the role of the tribes in all these issues. And they do get neglected and ignored, and we just march on and march over them quite often in this process. So having 3 on our side of the aisle, once again, Democrats who are inclusive, find that we learn a lot more about those issues because we have those members among us that teach us and make us alert to problems of the tribes. More so than I think the other side of the aisle who doesn't have that advantage.
Well, you must like this job.
Well, most days I do. Some moments I don't.
I mean, have you always been a political person, or was this something that kind of came on gradually, or?
Oh, I suppose you could say when I worked at the University of Montana, I was president of the bargaining unit there for Montana Public Employees Association, and I was also president of the Staff Senate. I was always getting involved in something where there might be a place I could stir up a little trouble and have some fun and have an impact.
So when your term limits here, say, Vickie, you're done in the House of Representatives, would you entertain some thoughts about seeking another office?
Probably. At this point in time, I have no plans, though.
Right.
Just here for this term and don't know if I'll be back for another one, you know. It's up to the people to decide that.
Right. And before we wrap it up, I'll just ask you, is there anything that you want to add that's been on your mind and you want to vent your spleen, or you know, I can't think of every question, and
there are a couple issues that are very troubling here, and one of those is the property tax freeze proposal, and I have huge concerns for people, especially in Missoula, who are facing a 63% increase in their property taxes. We need to solve this problem. I have been describing this freeze as locking the monster in the closet and feeding him. In other words, the whole time the monster's in there, the value of property continues to go up in Missoula. What will he look like when he comes out? If we don't deal with that monster now, not just freeze the property tax situation, but really truly reform it, we are going to have a bigger monster on our hands, and it will be so overwhelming that the state will be in crisis. Schools will be in crisis. Governments, local governments will be in crisis. Mostly the citizens, homeowners who can't afford to live in their homes. That will be the biggest problem we face. That, and I just have concerns about the trend that I see happening here, where huge corporations, lobbies by the insurance company, and some other entities are having so much power over some of the votes and voting that's going on in these committees. And it's frightening when you want to take care of the environment and take care of people's rights and freedoms to see how much influence they're having in this session. And people out there need to be aware that that is happening here on a daily basis.
Hi, McCarthy Coyle, thanks for watching. And I came away from this visit to the legislature with a few thoughts. One, I concur with Sandy Oitzinger of the Montana Women's Lobby that this legislature is suffering from a bankruptcy of ideas. And I found Vickie Cocchiarella's, the House Minority Leader, that her comments on what she perceives as a lack of leadership on Governor Roscoe's part, that there does seem to be some evidence that his own party is, you know, if they're not more extreme than he is, then we really have something to worry about. Perhaps most significant for our future in Montana were the interview with Mark O'Keefe, the state auditor who sits on the State Lands Board. I spoke with Mark without the camera because our camerawoman, Gwen Hoppy, was doing some pre-production work elsewhere. But both O'Keefe and Cooney, as you heard Secretary of State Cooney indicate, that it isn't just a question of the money when it comes to state school lands, that they will, there's at least 2 of the 5 on the State Lands Board who will be watching very carefully, and that it isn't just a question of the money, that they're not going to sell out the necessarily the health and welfare and beauty and long-term economic development in the state of Montana simply because there seems to be a lot of money at hand in a gold mine, especially in a year when we've seen the price of gold drop from $418 an ounce to $345 an ounce, and a lot of gold miners pulling back. I also, especially after going up to the legislature these many years, Vickie Cocchiarella's comment to the effect of keep your eyes on the lobbyists. We have very weak laws in this state governing lobbyists. I mean, everybody can complain in the state about what's going on in the federal level, but I think we need stricter disclosure laws on the part of lobbyists so that we know just how much money they're making and where they're spending it at all times, and that happens quickly. Seeing some of the same old deadwood in Helena in the legislature that I saw 20 years ago. I don't get into the term limits argument too much, but as I say, seeing some of the deadwood that's still there 20 years later, I think maybe a case can be made for term limits. I think it will be nice to see eventually some fresh faces up there. I hear that when the legislators gather and recite the Pledge of Allegiance, some are heard saying, I pledge allegiance to the Republicans. We live in the Mountain Time Zone. I mean, the Mountain Time Zone isn't even mentioned. You know, when you're watching television at home and it says, this program will be seen at such and such Pacific time and such Central time and such Eastern time. But the Mountain Time Zone is never mentioned. And, perhaps that's because only 5% of the American population lives in the Mountain Time Zone. So 95% of all of Americans live in a different time zone space than we do. So maybe that's either part of our problem or part of our potential. The fella in the state legislature who's trying to eliminate all special preferences or advantages that the handicap might receive, or this group or that group or the other thing, but nothing is said about eliminating the veterans' preference. I assume that's because the veterans remain a very powerful lobby. Well, I think veterans, I'm a vet, and I think all veterans should be speaking up now and saying, look, it's not appropriate or fair, it's just in plain ordinary fairness. Why should vets get a preference and not someone else who needs a leg up? So that was an impression that was refocused for me when I visited the legislature. Just remember, 1,000 days from today will be in the year 2000. 1,000 days, and then we'll be in 2000. So I like the idea when someone was mentioning a state legislature with a bankruptcy of ideas, we have housing problems, we have low-income housing problems, the lack thereof, people who can't afford it. I'd like to see a state senator or a governor or anyone in elected or non-elected positions of power talk about making available lumber from state forest lands that belong to all the people of Montana that could be made available at a low cost or no cost availability to people who need to build a decent shelter for themselves. And there should be term limits on lobbyists, maybe one session and then they're out of there. Here's the report of the State Attorney General, the disposition of public lands by the Montana University system since June the 6th, 1972. This is the one that everybody's trying to cop a plea on. And thanks to some work by a lot of people, this book, which I picked up in Helena, reveals the inner workings in detail of how the regents did what they did. And I've always liked the word, most of us are familiar with the word malfeasance, which generally refers to, you know, corruption and bribery, things like that. But I also like the word misfeasance, M-I-S, misfeasance, which is defined as the doing of a lawful act in an unlawful manner so that there is an infringement on the rights of others. And I think that this is what happened in the Regents' case. And they're unwilling to lay it down. I think it's time that they got rid of that attorney that they've had for so many years and who uses such insulting terms to speak of the people of Missoula and our ilk, because we object to the illegal process that they used, you know, to make money. And I didn't hear, you know, the Regents call for, you know, a revamping and a house cleaning of both the foundation at Montana State University and the foundation up here at the University of Montana, with a complete, you know, new board setup and, you know, auditing and start from scratch. But no. We still have the Regents, and I voted, you know, painfully to retain the Regents as they are with their independence. We had that on the legislature. I did want an independent board of Regents running the university system, but I don't like a lot of the jobs that they're doing. And like I said, I think they ought to get rid of that attorney who's not doing them any good at all. So you can get this report about all the misfeasance of the Regents over 20 years' time in trading lands and getting rid of lands. Then here's an interesting one. This is connecting Montana to the world. And I guess you could say that this 80 pages or so of, you know, palaver, a lot of mishmash, cost $30,000. This was the result of a law passed by the last legislature setting up what was called the Governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force on Telecommunications. And so the governor had some appointments, and they've been meeting for a couple of years, but curiously, I'm speaking from a facility, Missoula Community Access Television, which is perhaps the most productive and busiest telecommunications center in the state of Montana. And this center never heard from the governor's Blue Ribbons Telecommunications Task Force. Never heard where they were meeting, when they were meeting. In this entire report, there's 3 paragraphs that talk about cable television. I didn't know this was coming along. I wonder if I had you know, kicked in $7,000 or $31,000 like AT&T or US West, then I could have had a seat at the table there too at these meetings. Because you know what happened? Last week I was up there and I went to the hearing on the bill that emerged from setting up this task force. And you know, the bill may have had, the bill turned out to be a draft law about the telephone companies in the state of Montana. Now, I'm not saying that they don't deserve some attention. And I'm not saying that there weren't some worthwhile matters in the bill that I went to testify on. But I want to say that when I look at the legislature, as I have over 18 years or so now, the hardest job is the citizen's job. It's not the legislator, and it's not the lobbyist who is making anywhere from X to $100,000 a year to stand up there in the lobby and to go to these hearings with their suits on and their big sticker saying, who they are and how important they are. I went in to testify on that bill and to call the legislative committee's attention to the fact that this report is incomplete, totally incomplete. This has nothing to do with connecting Montana to the world. That's all hype and rhetoric. It's baloney, and it's typical that the citizenry was really not engaged on this matter at all. And by the time I got up to these hearing rooms, if this legislature really wants citizen participation, instead of worrying overly much about, how to beautify the Capitol and how to find the money for it, they ought to, open up, big hearing rooms and really give citizens an opportunity to graciously, present their ideas and their testimony instead of getting the runaround and the shrill and gruff treatment that I've seen other people get. And that's too bad. That's unfortunate. Because citizens don't get sufficient opportunity. It's definitely it's a runaway legislature up there, as near as I can tell. Often mean-spirited, and I think that it's appropriate to say that my modest efforts, supported by a lot of volunteer labor, Gwen Hoppy running camera, Pete Talbot helping push buttons. MCAT facilities, Terry Jimerson loaning equipment, family and friends, Ray Horan, insights and good food. But this isn't enough. Where's Montana Public Television? Where are the cameras up there in the hearing rooms? Let's have a Montana span. Where's the cable industry? Coming up and, in this marvelous world of technology that everybody brags about. TCI was represented on this so-called Connecting Montana to the World. We need more coverage of the legislature, much more, daily, every day. And I think that example that both Sandy Oitzinger used and Vickie Cocchiarella talking about how money for children that was available and that was set aside by the federal government for the people of Montana to use for our children, and yet you don't, or at least in any really apparent sense, do we see the governor out there lobbying his own party to get the funds that are there, only being held back by people who, I don't know, maybe they think that all people have the same amount of money or ignorance that they do. And finally, I'll close by, because there's, of course, a big battle about the arts going on in the Montana legislature. And, of course, there's those know-nothings, almost in the classic sense of 19th century know-nothings, who don't want any arts funded at all. And Clinton, in his State of the Union message the other day, and I don't call Clinton St. Bill, but he says, "I'd like to make one last point about our national community. Our economy is measured in numbers and statistics, and it's very important, but the enduring worth of our nation lies in our values and our soaring spirit. So instead of cutting back on our modest efforts to support the arts and humanities, I believe we should stand by them and challenge our artists, musicians, and writers, our museums, libraries, and theaters. Let's do that in Montana as well." Thanks for watching. There's a rerun of this show on Friday or tomorrow at 5 o'clock. And don't forget the First Amendment show, 6:30, Monday night live. Come on down and have your speak. Good night. Thanks a lot. Bye.